Beld's dad passed away, and so she's going through a difficult time. But thank you, Scott, for joining us. So welcome to meeting number 6 of the Subcommittee on International Human Rights. Pursuant to the order of reference of October 27th, 2020, Subcommittee will begin the study of the impacts of COVID-19 on displaced persons, particularly in Venezuela and Myanmar. To ensure an orderly meeting, I would encourage all participants to mute their microphones when they're not speaking and address all comments through the chair. When you have 30 seconds left in your questioning time, I will signal you with this kind of paper so you're aware of the time. And so interpretation is available for everyone through the globe icon on the bottom of your screen. So you'll be able to go over there and either not change it if you're bilingual, or to click on the French or the English, depending on what you require. I'd now like to welcome our witnesses for our first panel. From Amnesty International, we have Carolina Jimenez, and I hope I said that correctly, Research Director for the Americas. And from the Canadian Venezuela Engagement Foundation, we have Gabby J. Garcia, the president of the organization. So Ms. Carolina Jimenez, you're going to have now 5 minutes for your remarks. And then Ms. Garcia, you will also have 5 minutes, and then we will go to the members for questions, and you may begin.
Thank you very much to the committee for inviting Amnesty International to discuss Venezuela's human rights crisis and its impact on forced displacement. As we speak, the human rights crisis in Venezuela persists and continues to deteriorate, as is evidenced by the ever-increasing number of Venezuelans seeking protection in other countries. As of 5th of November, this number bordered 5.5 million people. Venezuelans are fleeing a context of massive human rights violations. However, only 2.5 million have regular migratory status in their host countries, and a much smaller number, 143,000, have been formally recognized as refugees. Regrettably, some countries in the Americas have failed to comply with international refugee rights standards. Countries like Peru, for example, have resorted to increasingly restrictive practices at its borders, while Trinidad and Tobago regularly deports Venezuelans, including children. In some of the main host countries in Latin America, like Colombia, Peru, and Ecuador, 90% of Venezuelan migrants and refugees work in the informal sector, without any access to social security for themselves and their families. Given this context, it was not surprising that at the beginning of the pandemic, we witnessed tens of thousands of Venezuelans return to their home country, many on foot, because they lost their jobs, and some were also left homeless. From mid-March to October, it is estimated that over 135,000 people have returned to Venezuela. But what have they returned to? Unfortunately, many have been forced to stay in state-run quarantine centers. Amnesty International believes that in times of public health emergencies, like this one, authorities may legitimately impose quarantines. However, our research has found that in Venezuela, many of the warehouses, sports stadiums, and other facilities where the government has placed people to complete mandatory state-run quarantines have often been unsanitary or lack basic supplies, which could amount to ill treatment. It is now reported that the number of people returning have decreased in the last 2 months or so. And perhaps surprisingly, given the context, local NGOs are reporting informal crossings along the border with Colombia, meaning that Venezuelans are once again leaving the country. The humanitarian crisis will continue to worsen, with widespread shortages of essential goods and services, food, healthcare, water, In high levels of extreme poverty, people will continue to flee their communities, as for many, it is the only option to survive. All of this happens in a context of severe repression, social control, and systemic impunity. The United Nations fact-finding mission on Venezuela published a landmark report in September and established there were reasonable grounds to believe that crimes against humanity have been committed in Venezuela since 2014. Before I conclude, I would like to once again reaffirm the importance of supporting the rights of millions of refugees in the Americas. In the Central America, Mexico, and U.S. migration corridor, for example, we have seen entire families, as well as unaccompanied migrant children from Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, make the dangerous journey to seek protection only to be detained and deported to the same dangerous communities that they try to flee. Refugees from Venezuela and from Central America urgently need the support of the international community to ensure that their rights are guaranteed and respected. Human rights crises require humanitarian solutions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Jimenez. And now we'll go to Ms. Garcia for 5 minutes.
I want to thank you, Carolina, because I think that she been enclosed all the problem and the numbers of Venezuela. So I want to highlight the humanitarian crisis that we live in Venezuela, and is with the Venezuelan migrants around Latin America. You have to know that in Venezuela, the overall poverty is 96% of the population. It's a high number because we have a lack of food, medicine, water, natural gas, diesel, and the levels of malnutrition and lack of education among Venezuelan children are highly increased since last year. We can say that the crisis that highlights in the vulnerabilities of the migrants, we can say that we have three kind of crises. The health crisis, because the Venezuelan migrants are exposed to the virus and they cannot have tools to protect themselves. The Venezuelan find it difficult to access to health services in the country they move due to legal, cultural, or other barriers that they found in the countries around. Almost when they decided to return, as Carolina said, it's only 120 something thousand or 130,000. They returned from Colombia in buses and returning by foot. And when they came back to Venezuela, because they needed to reunite it with the family, and they can found that almost 90% of the hospital have a critical shortage of supplies. More than half of the Venezuelan doctors, they left the country. So even the beds are not enough for the 32 million that we have in Venezuela. In other hands, the socioeconomic crisis that affect the Venezuelan migrants because they subsist with almost nothing. They work in the informal economy and they don't have access to social protection in any of the countries, just a few of them, no? The non-essential workers that forced to stay home, and the charities operating in reduced capacity do that the Venezuelan find themselves in a more vulnerable situation. But the third crisis is the protection crisis. The Venezuelan women and girls, this is a point that I want to highlight, are especially vulnerable right now. The rates of domestic violence against women have been in the rise during confinement in Latin America. The Venezuelan women and girls evicted from their home at a risk of sexual exploitation and abuse. And the numbers are high, and more of them have to make survival prostitution just to have some food for them and for the family. So in other cases, the fear of COVID-19 exacerbating already high levels of xenophobia, racism, stigmatization, and even attacks against refugees and migrants in the countries. So Venezuelan humanitarian crisis and the social and economic cost of the pandemic will require more help for people who are more vulnerable, and the international community has the opportunity to ensure the being well of Venezuelan in the country and in the displaces. The Canadian NGO who works with Venezuela can help Canada government to reinforce the aid to help Venezuelans stay in the country rather than force them to return for a more difficult situation in other countries. I want to thank you to all the subcommittee for inviting us.
Well, thank you, Ms. Garcia and Ms. Jimenez. And now we're going to go to the members for questions. We're going to start with the Liberals, and that will be Mr. Sims for 7 minutes. Mr. Sims.
Thank you, Chair, and I want to thank our guests for their powerful words and as witnesses of what this horrendous situation is providing, is giving to these people, and how we're deeply concerned. My question, I'll jump right into. I want to address the bad actors situation when it comes to surrounding nations of Venezuela. You know, you mentioned earlier Peru, but in the case of, say, Brazil, Colombia, who is doing what they can to measure up to what they feel is a crisis, and they want to help Venezuelan refugees, and those who are not acting in good faith for these Venezuelan refugees, not just COVID-19, but in general for what they're doing, especially domestic abuse and sexual exploitation that's being talked about. I'll start with Ms. Jimenez.
Thank you, and that's a very important question, because I think we need to acknowledge that it is a crisis that can be felt as overwhelming for host countries. I mean, 90% of those 5.5 million people are in Latin American countries. So yes, the numbers are staggering, and yes, these are developing countries as well, the host communities. Now, I think there are a few things I would like to point out. You do have countries like Trinidad and Tobago, for example, that refuse to acknowledge that Venezuelans fleeing the human rights crisis should be considered as refugees. Not only that, the laws in Trinidad and Tobago still criminalize irregular entry, which is something, contrary to international standards of human rights. So the deportations that have taken place in the last 2 years included deportation of women and children as little as 6 months old. This happened 3 weeks ago. They deported a baby. Have been met, with a response from the government that unfortunately defies belief. I mean, the international community reacted strongly against these deportations, the Inter-American Human Rights Commission, the UNHCR, etc., and the government of Trinidad and Tobago refused to acknowledge that they had made a mistake and clearly stated that the deportations will continue. So you do have countries like these where the response is very negative, and it has not changed in the last few years. Now, when it comes to countries like Colombia, Brazil, and Peru, there is a mixed response. Brazil has shown some good practices. They have recognized the refugees in the thousands in short periods of time, in a special operation, sort of saying, and they have moved refugees from cities where they were highly vulnerable to cities where there are better conditions. Yet there are still many people without regular status. In Colombia, where you have more than 1.7 million Venezuelans, I think the challenge is higher because the numbers are, as I said before, the magnitude of the crisis is bigger. I think at the beginning of the crisis in 2014, 2015, Colombia did try to address the issue of irregular status and created alternative mechanisms. Most Venezuelans do not have refugee status in Latin America, but they created alternative ways to protect people, like temporary status, etc. Unfortunately, not even 40% of Venezuelans living in Colombia have a regular status. So I think the Colombian government could do more to implement new measures to regularize people. And then I think some key politicians have expressed themselves in ways that promote a xenophobic narrative, and that should be avoided.
Sure, it should. And coming from a country of Canada and how we treated, and this was not I don't think anyone really used this extensively for when it comes to Syrian refugees in Canada. And I think we should use that as an international example of how we treat Syrian refugees, but also we should point to other countries who don't measure up to what we consider to be a good standard by which you should treat people who come in across our borders and are just desperate for help. And I'm going to go to Ms. Garcia. You can address that issue as well, but I also, before my time runs out, I also wanted to talk about, you mentioned it, 135,000 people coming back in, but what do they come back to is the question, like the circumstances by which they come back. So I'll go to Ms. Garcia. You comment on people in other countries, the refugees in the other countries, but also when they come back into Venezuela, how is it they obviously going back to their own circumstances that they left are not the same? Ms. Garcia.
No, the circumstances are worsened, as Carolina says. The problem is that if you are a refugee or you are not...
Ms. Garcia, if you could just hold your mic closer to your mouth. I apologize for interrupting.
Sorry, like this? You hear better?
Yes, please.
Okay, the problem is that when you come back, you found that Venezuela has worsened in the numbers of lack of medicine, of food, and everything. But if you are in a country that you are you don't have a legal status, so you don't have enough, you have an informal job, or you don't have nothing to sustain yourself or your family, you say, okay, I prefer to stay in my country because you have family that can help us, in some way. And the COVID, because of the COVID, most of them are without jobs. So they are informal workers, and they have, they want the ones who left the jobs. So they return to Venezuela looking for support, familiar support, no? Because in Venezuela, when they left, more of them are in young adults, and they left the children, they left the parents. So Venezuela right now is a country full of old people, and they don't have even food. They are with the COVID also.
Thank you, Ms. Garcia.
Thank you for your insights.
Yeah, and thank you, Mr. Simpson. We'll be moving now to the Conservatives and Mr. Reid for 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for our witnesses. I'd like Ms. Garcia, if I could, to continue by asking you some additional follow-up questions. The first thing is just I want to get a sense of the nature of migration. Clearly, if we take the last number of years as a whole, people have on net been leaving Venezuela, about 5 million in total. We've heard from previous witnesses that there are people returning to Venezuela, but I got the impression there are also people still trying to leave Venezuela. One of our witnesses last week talked about 100 different points at which they're illegally crossing the border into Colombia, in some cases putting themselves in considerable danger. So are both flows happening at the same time, or I'll just ask, what is going on?
It's going on that there is no hope for Venezuelans inside Venezuela. A lot of people, young people, they don't see any future for them or for their children. So they try to going out. From 2017, it's increased the curve of the migrants, and they just live by thousand, no? And they just get to a different countries, they stay there, and the proportion between the 5.5 million of migrants with the 100,000 that they coming back is not
Sure.
is high. So the ones who coming back is because more of the time that they have their families in Venezuela, and they cannot support them. No, during 2017, 2018, a lot of money entered to Venezuela because you have your job outside. You can send $30, $40, $50, $10, and it was enough to buy food, to survive your family that you have in Venezuela. If you don't have work and you cannot have money in the country, in Colombia, in Peru, in Brazil, so your family in Venezuela doesn't have any money to eat. They don't have anything to eat. They don't have food, they don't have medicine, and they are old people, most of them, they are children, and they needed somehow, they live for 1 year, for 2 years with the money who came into Venezuela as the remesas. I don't know how to say in English. It's when you send money from
remittance. It's called a remittance in English.
From remittance, but that's finished with the COVID because the people don't have any jobs. So the people in Venezuela do not work because there are no formal jobs. No, yes. Very few of them. So they just stay all day long. The children, they have no connectivity. They don't have classes. They don't have education. So if you have some level, you try to going out of the country just to give a better future for your children.
Okay, thank you. Dealing with COVID itself, the actual disease, as opposed to the reaction that different countries have had to the disease, we know now that it is much more dangerous for older people, people who've got underlying conditions frequently associated with age, than younger people. I'm left with the impression, from what you'd said, that the people who left the country are largely younger people who are then sending money back into Venezuela to help a population that's older. So looking at the impact of the disease itself, as opposed to people's reactions to the disease, is it the case that the people who've left are less badly affected than those who have remained behind because of the age profile?
Yes, the problem is that we don't have testing enough in Venezuela. The people dying, and the last resource that you said, that is that died from COVID. So a lot of people dying, and we don't have the statistic, we don't have the numbers because we don't have the test. So the government says some number, and you cannot really believe in that numbers. And in the countryside, there is a lot of small towns, and the older people, they are dying, no, and they cannot even pay for be buried, enterrar. So it's a very, very, very complicated situation because even in a developed country as a Canada, we all know that we have a complicated situation and we have some restriction and everything. You can imagine in a country that yesterday the president said that December is a flexibilization of the measure because it's December and everybody has to celebrate. For all December, we don't have any restriction about the COVID. So
that's in Venezuela, or that's in one of the other countries?
In Venezuela. This is inside Venezuela, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. I did want to ask one last thing. I apologize. All my questions, Ms. Garcia, are to you, and none of them are to you, Ms. Jimenez. It's just the nature of what your testimony prompted. I did want to ask, with regard to the issue of NGOs helping Venezuelans to stay in country, that's the term you used. Did you mean that we would help Venezuelans to stay in Venezuela, or would help them to stay in places like Colombia and not have to return to Venezuela? I wasn't sure which of the two you meant.
Yes, because Canada, it was very helpful for the migrants in all the countries around. But I always asking for help for the people who stay in Venezuela. We have
Okay.
yes, we need maybe working with NGOs, and we are a lot of NGOs who working inside Venezuela to try to keep the children, the people in Venezuela, not to go in looking for a solution for the migrants, for the refugees, etc.
Thank you. That's very helpful. I think I'm out of time. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And thank you, Mr. Reed. And now we'll move to the block with Mr. Brunel Duceppe for 7 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Buenas tardes a
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you very much for being here. It's very much appreciated. Last week in the subcommittee meeting, we had the National Director of Care in Colombia. You might know him, but he told us, well, he said that the international community should understand that girls and women of Venezuela require special needs, and that's the work special that I retain. Ms. Garcia, in your testimony, you talked about this issue of the girls and women in Venezuela, and I would like to know what is the situation of the human rights and how did this change since the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. And then Ms. Jimenez, you could perhaps complete Ms. Garcia's answer, but I would like to ask Ms. Garcia.
The problem is that for example, in Colombia or in the border with Brazil, so the prostitution, the sexual abuse, and everything is sometimes the easier way to get some money. So even I heard about it that some professional engineers with profession that they don't have any jobs, they start to be in an apps with the porno photographies and everything, because they have to survive, and not even them, they have to support the families in Venezuela. So with the pandemic, all we know that the domestic violence is higher in all the countries, not only in Venezuela. With the situation in the ¿cómo tú dices? En los campamentos, in the camps, no? They don't have social distances. They don't have like I don't know if the refugees camps are like this, but they everybody with everybody. So it's a very dangerous situation for the girls, for the children, and for the women.
Dans les camps, il n'y a pas de mesure de distance.
So in the camps, you don't have any social distanciation measures because they are very close to one another. That's what you're saying.
Social distances in the camps, no? There is even the more of the dining food that they have in the borders that they have for 2-3 years, they close. So they don't have access to a free food, at least, no, to support the families. So they are by their own. They just cross the borders, and it's dangerous for in every country, but in Latin America, it's dangerous for a woman to go along with the children, and you know how it is.
Peut-être que Madame Jiménez, vous pourriez.
Perhaps, Madame Jiménez, you could continue on the subject because it's something quite important for us.
I'm very glad that we are addressing the issue of gender and how forced migration impacts women and girls differently. In the first place, I think sadly there is agreement that human trafficking is a common reality for many women and girls from Venezuela, traveling through clandestine routes in very dangerous circumstances and placing themselves in situations where they are easy prey for human traffickers. Unfortunately, there are very few protections in place for victims of human trafficking, and perhaps because of the nature of human trafficking itself, there isn't enough information. We don't have clear statistics. Laws are different across the region, so it is not an issue that is being properly addressed. Also, as I said, it impacts women and girls in various ways, and it is something that should have by far more attention than it has right now. We have documented cases of human trafficking in Trinidad and Tobago and in the Dominican Republic, because in the Caribbean this is unfortunately a very common problem. But the situation is not too different in Colombia, in Peru, etc., where also common narrative often present Venezuelan migrant women in a hypersexualized way. So yes, there is human trafficking and there is also survival sex, but the way women and girls are exposed to the situation is different and affects them differently. And I think it is incredibly important to understand the impact it has on them. And as I said, I personally believe it's a very unaddressed issue, something that people don't like to talk about, something that politicians don't like to talk about, something that often involves law enforcement agents, even politicians in some places, etc. So I think there is a lot to learn about it, and there is a lot to do against it.
Mais justement, parce qu'on est ici pour ça, on est...
Precisely because we're here for that. We're a subcommittee, but it's a committee of the House of Commons of Canada. So you stated that sometimes politicians don't dare to deal with those issues. So what can or how can Canada assist humanitarian organizations to respond to those specific needs of women and girls who are displaced from Venezuela? How can we, as politicians, make a difference?
Madame Garcia, vous avez levé la...
Ms. Garcia, you raised your hand.
Sorry, because it's only 30 seconds.
Really?
You have in Canada 45,000 of...
Please lift your mic just to your mouth. Your mic. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Garcia.
45,000 of Syrian refugees, and you are very proud of that. You have in Canada 1,500 Venezuelan refugees. So we asking to Canada to open up a little bit with the programs, with something that you can help the Venezuelan to come to Canada with all the restrictions, all the restrictions that you want. But we find that Canada is like a barrier, and it's making it so difficult for the people to asking for asylum, for refugee, to enter to the country, even to reunite it with the family that they have in Canada as a Canadian, as a resident, permanent residence, and everything.
Thank you.
Merci beaucoup pour votre réponse, Madame Garcia.
Thank you for your answer.
And Ms. McPherson for 7 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank both the witnesses for being with us today and for sharing this very, very difficult testimony with us. The first questions that I would like to ask revolve around, I have a history in international development, and one of the things that I always think that is so shocking is that we are constantly putting out fires. We are constantly dealing with the impact of not investing in our communities, not giving money to our communities. Ms. Garcia, could you talk a little bit about what we could do? What would be those things that we could do to help the crisis in Venezuela right now? We know it started as an electoral issue, but what could the government of Canada do to help people return to Venezuela, to stay in Venezuela, to protect those people who are still in Venezuela?
Well, this is very important because our NGO, we have an alliance with the Canadian NGO, and we're sending almost 8,000 meals to Venezuela only in this 2020. So if we can guarantee the children at least food, education, that maybe we can do some online education, so some program that we can give them some equipment or connectivity or everything, because they needed to go to study. They needed to learn. They needed to know how to survive Venezuela, because the Venezuelan doesn't want to go outside. We like to live in our country. But if they lose the hope, for a better future for the children, of course that you're looking for something for your children. Mm-hmm. But I think that maybe we can work together with the ONGOs that is in Canada to see how we can help the people in Venezuela. Not only the money for the governments of the neighbor countries, because we need it for the migrants, but we need it also for Venezuelans.
I think that's an excellent point. I mean, I think that it's very, very important that Canada does support those countries that have Venezuelan refugees that have fled there, to support them so that they can provide the services. But it is fundamentally the goal that Venezuelans return to Venezuela and have a livelihood, that they can survive, they can thrive, their families can go to school, and they can have what they need. Maybe I'll ask the next question of, if I could, of Amnesty, of Ms. Jimenez. In terms of the impact on the work of humanitarian organizations in Venezuela, do you see access to things for those organizations, like medicine, like food? Is that happening? Can you talk a little bit about what the humanitarian response has been and what you would like to see the humanitarian response be?
Well, in the first place, I think one big problem is that this is a very underfunded humanitarian response. To give you an example, the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, OCHA, which is the office that coordinates all of the agencies operating in Venezuela, requested $762 million for 2020 to operate in Venezuela. It received 146 million. And the same goes for every country where they operate and coordinate the response toward Venezuelan refugees. 80% deficit from what they request to what they receive at the end, in Colombia and Peru. So I think one thing that would be very important to address is how underfunded this crisis is. I do think that the role of humanitarian organizations and workers in general is key. But it is not a secret that is being restricted. The World Food Program has been trying to get access to Venezuela for over a year now. It has been denied access so far. It hasn't been given any access, which is the same as being denied access.
Of course.
And then, and that's urgent. I mean, this is a country with a severe food insecurity crisis. 2/3 of the Venezuelan population, is said to be hungry. In a situation of food insecurity. So the role of an agency like the World Food Program is very important, but they're not getting any access to the country. We have seen in the last 2 months or so an increase in attacks against humanitarian workers and humanitarian organizations. That worries us very much. Mm-hmm. They have frozen bank accounts of some key NGOs. They have actually raided their headquarters. So it's not an easy environment to operate. It is challenging, it is difficult. I think it's important to ensure that human rights defenders and humanitarian workers working in Venezuela know that if there is a moment where they need to, flee the country for security reasons, they can have access to countries that will, receive them if the situation becomes that extreme.
Well, and I think that's one of the things that we had heard from Ms. Garcia is that Canada needs to be more open, that our refugee processes need to work better so that people can access those. So what I'm understanding from you is that, of course, food security is massive. I'm on the Foreign Affairs Committee as well, and we actually just heard this evening about the importance of food security in Venezuela. So I understand what you're saying, but it seems like the politicization of humanitarianism is really the root cause of the inability of organizations to provide support to Venezuelan refugees. Is that correct? Would you agree with that assessment?
I think when it comes to Venezuela, there is a lot of, polarization in general. But I think it's important that governments distinguish, when it comes to the work of independent and non-partisan humanitarian organizations and the work of others. And I strongly believe there are many important and relevant organizations, humanitarian and human rights organizations, doing work in favor of the people of Venezuela without any political agenda attached to their work.
And I know I'm almost out of time, but if either of you have anything to say on what you'd like to see parliamentarians like myself and my colleagues do for you, what would that be?
Increase the funding for the Venezuelan NGOs and for those supporting refugees in other countries.
Thank you so much. Ms. Garcia?
Thank you. And thank you, Ms. McPherson. And
okay.
we're going to move to our second round. You'll have an opportunity to thank, of course, the witnesses at the end of our second round. The second round now begins for 5 minutes for each party. And we'll start with the Liberals with Mr. Zuberi.
I wanted to thank both of you for being here today and sharing your testimony with us, informing us of what's happening in Venezuela, but also to displaced people from Venezuela. I would just want to zoom out for a moment and ask about the political situation and what has led to the current crisis. If you can just give us a brief thumbnail sketch of what's actually happening as of recent to lead to this. Number one. And number two is I'd like to ask you about the impacts of COVID in the context of the political situation also. So you can just walk us through the very recent political situation and how that has been changed, or if it has been changed because of COVID at all.
Well, the COVID is like a weapon for the government. No, they use the COVID situation as for represalias. No, I don't know how to say, to control the population, control even the food, the gas. Everything is about the sanctions from United States, and we have a lack of gas for a few months that the people has to do large lines. But everything is not our fault as a government, as a Venezuela government, it's the fault for the sanctions. And they use all the COVID situation for new laws, for special laws that they can do with the economy. And they use it for themselves to control population. This is a fact, no? So for a time, it's going more difficult for the migrants to control because they don't speak anything about the migrants. For them, that doesn't exist. That problem doesn't exist. It's only in the mind of the people who fled Venezuela. But in Venezuela, everybody is happy. Everybody is have food. So this is my point of view. For them, I think that they getting stronger in this part because they have an motivation, or they have some excuse for control the population.
I understand. And Ms. Jimenez, did I pronounce your name correctly?
Yes, you did. Jimenez.
Great. If you can please also, if you want to answer that question.
Well, I agree with Ms. Garcia very much on the issue of control. I mean, it's, you know, a lot of reports from the UN and from international human rights organizations have expressively documented the policy of social control that the government exercises when it comes to, you know, controlling food distribution, access to health, etc. It is a way of controlling people. There are many reasons that will perhaps explain why Venezuela is into this dire situation. For us as a human rights organization, of course, we point to state responsibility. I think the repressive nature of the government implies, you know, that it is very difficult for citizens to express themselves, to demand changes, or to even propose changes. So that the cycle of the crisis basically recycles itself. And I do have to, you know, say this, I mentioned it in my presentation. It is not every day that a UN independent commission, you know, establishes that crimes against humanity have been committed in a country, and a fact-finding mission of Venezuela have said so. And this is something for, you know, for history.
Certainly. I know that you both have spoken about the situation that is impacting women and girls in a unique way. Is there anything you want to add in addition to what you've said to us, to the committee? Do you want to share anything in addition to what you've already said as the crisis is impacting women and girls?
Yes, not only women and girls, as Carolina said, that is always also the human trafficking for the organs of the organ of the human trafficking. So the children are very affected for this.
Thank you. And you have about 15 seconds if you want to add to that single point, or we can continue on.
Yeah, no, I think we often overlook the way the crisis impacts women and girls when it comes to sexual and reproductive health, early pregnancy, you know, and many things related to the lack of access to contraception, etc., are affecting women in a very negative way. And many have to flee because of the lack of health services specifically for women.
Thank you.
Thanks to you both.
Thank you, Mr. Berry. And welcome to our committee, Mr. Van Popta. Good to have you here. You'll have an opportunity now for 5 minutes to question the witnesses.
Well, good. Thank you very much for welcoming me to the committee. I'm looking forward to working with you today. And thank you very much to our two witnesses, Ms. Jimenez and Ms. Garcia, for being with us and telling us about this human rights crisis in Venezuela and parts of South America, Central America. You talked about some of the work that is being done effectively by NGOs and humanitarian organizations. Ms. Jimenez, you also talked about what really amounts to a crisis, and that is human trafficking of women and girls. Are there any NGOs or humanitarian organizations who are focusing on that work and who are working effectively in that field? For either one of you, we will start with Ms. Jimenez, perhaps.
Yeah, thank you. As I said, I think one big problem around human trafficking is how much it is unknown about it because of the nature of the crime itself. You know, it's all it's mainly done through deceit, through coercion. It involves actors that work by hiding themselves, etc. So there are, of course, organizations working on this, but working on this issue often implies security risks for lawyers, for NGOs, for people who run shelters for victims, etc. So it is not a field of work where you have too many actors, precisely because of the nature of human trafficking. The UN has some working groups, and there are NGOs in most of the host countries. But I think the tremendous lack of information, impacts the way people work on this issue. And I think commissioning a very good diagnosis that could identify, what the key problems are, what the key solutions could be, is still much needed.
I can understand that. Without diagnosing the problem, it's hard to come up with a solution. But it's just something that perhaps Canada could be doing more work on in that field.
Yeah, maybe because I think that they don't have enough money even for the NGO who works in this field, because that Carolina said, that is a problem that is always under the carpet. So we know a lot of cases of women even in Trinidad last week, and in the Caribbean is very, very heavy, the problem, because even for the stigmatization, they say, like, you see Venezuelan migrant woman and you say, okay, maybe she works in prostitution, it's easy because maybe they have to do it. So I don't think there is a lot of NGOs working with this problem because it's very confused, all the situation.
I understand that. But perhaps you could, Ms. Garcia, tell me about some of the other NGOs that are working not just with refugees out of Venezuela, but with working to manage poverty within Venezuela and the
Venezuela?
relationship of NGOs with the government?
No, for the government, they saw the NGOs as a competition. So there is no link between government and the NGOs. They are totally apolitical, independent, and there is a lot of people who work in Venezuela. Low profile that you don't hear about it, but it's a lot of work, a good work, social work, working with the food insecurity, working with medicine. They send it, for example, medicine from United States or Canada, but it's in transportation with boxes and directly to the doctors in the hospital, not to the hospital directors or coordinator, because most of the time they are politician with the political party. So, but the doctor that they receive directly for the patient, the medicine, and they can work in that.
Now, I don't know which of the two of you said this, but to the effect that the best solution is to get people to stay in Venezuela, but of course that's going to require, safety and security, economically and politically. So I'm very interested in the work that some of these NGOs are sort of doing underground.
Thank you, Mr.
Yes.
Van Popta. Yeah, your time's up, but thank you.
Right.
And now we'll move to the block and Mr. Brunel Duceppe for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We'll get back to you, Mr. Van Popta. Well, I'll get out of the beaten path and don't feel like you have to answer the question directly if you don't feel like it. But we were looking at this, my team and I, and we were thinking that support of Canada and of many other countries to Mr. Gado, the self-proclaimed president, has not led to the political transition that everybody hoped for. Do you think that the government should keep supporting Mr. Gualo, or should we try to find other ways to make sure that human rights are respected in Venezuela? If you don't feel comfortable answering this, don't. I'm just throwing this out.
National Assembly. And the National Assembly is the last institution elected by the people. So is the last institution that we have as legal. No, right now, next Sunday, there's gonna be a new election, but it's a fraud. It's something that they just put the winner. No. So I think that it's important that Canada support Guaido. Okay. Because he represents the not the opposition, the legal representative of Venezuela. So it's important because if we have unity, political unity in the opposition and everything, so I don't know the political way, no, to fight Maduro, but that's important to know that Guaido is not like a self-proclaimed. Okay. He is elected by because he's the president of the National Assembly. So he's legally the president if you didn't recognize the Maduro election.
Je comprends ce que vous dites. Okay.
It's some political way, but he's making a good work, and he tried the best, you know, in the worst condition that we have in our country.
Est-ce que vous vouliez ajouter quelque chose, Madame?
Did you want to add something, Mrs. Jimenez?
Peut-être pas.
Yeah. Thank you.
Maybe not.
International does not take a position.
Okay.
On this complex issue of two governments, etc. What we do demand is an end to political repression. Yeah. I mean, all citizens, including members of the opposition, should be able to freely exercise their right to hold public office, etc.
Parfait. Si on reste dans le...
Okay, so let's stay on the political file. Do you think that there's been an impact, or what has the Grupo de Lima had as an impact? Canada is a member of the Grupo de Lima. What has been the effect of this group in the field, on the ground in Venezuela? What do you think this has led to?
Again, it's like a political issue, no?
Mais si vous voulez pas répondre, je peux poser d'autres questions.
If you don't want to answer, if you're not comfortable, I can ask other questions.
Can work listening or getting united all the countries to listen the humanitarian crisis that we live in Venezuela. So it's a meetings or a group that expose that humanitarian crisis, that the one that we defended, not the political reason that they are recognizing Guaido or everything. But the important thing is that Venezuela is in the words of the people internationally. So they learn about what is going on from 20 years ago, that maybe just the 2 years ago, they know about it. Because maybe if the international community knows more about Venezuela 10 years ago and get some measures about it, we are not where we are right now.
J'aurais tellement plus de questions, mais le président vient.
I have so many questions, more questions, but I'm out of time.
Thank you, Mr. Bernaldesep. And now we'll move to Ms. McPherson for 5 minutes. And this will be the last questioner for these witnesses.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'll just start my timer there. Similar to my colleague, I have so many questions that I'd like to ask, and I thank you again for being here and sharing your expertise with us. One of the things that you talked about was sort of the weaponization that the government has used COVID-19 and how they have weaponized that and made it much harder within Venezuela for individuals, and also the idea of the sanctions. I'm very interested in the impacts that the sanctions have had on Venezuelans. You know, we saw that the UN asked for the invoking of Article 96 to actually look to have the International Court of Justice look at the sanctions and the impacts they've had. If both of you could just take a moment and talk a little bit about what the sanctions, the impacts of the sanctions, and sort of bring that together with the sanctions and COVID-19 and the weaponization of COVID-19 for the populations of Venezuela, if you wouldn't mind. And maybe I'll start with you, Ms. Garcia.
Well, as I said, Venezuela used to be a very rich country, very, very, very rich country. But the problem is that all the funding, they get it into the pockets of the politicians, no? So they didn't invest anything in the industry in Venezuela. They don't invest any money in the hospital, in the schools, in any structure or infrastructure that we will need as a country. So right now we are suffering the consequence of the 20 years of no investment. So the government said that all that happened right now is because of the sanctions, but it's not true. It's because we don't have infrastructure for, not even for gas, for oil, because we are a oil country, but we don't produce almost nothing. So for me, it's an excuse. Okay. But the people believe in that excuse because of the sanction. But it's true that they are turning out for countries as China, Russia, Iran. So they just receive it from them. Even the vaccines, they will receive it from the ones that they're gonna try in Venezuela.
Okay. Ms. Jimenez.
Sure. I think it's important to look at the timeline of the humanitarian crisis and to the developments of the human rights crisis in general. It is very clear and it's been very well established that the human rights crisis in Venezuela preceded the sanctions. It started long before the sanctions. Now, what it is also clear is that the sanctions have made the situation worse. Okay. Sanctions, have done little to really affect the Maduro government, but it has affected, people's access to food, medicine, especially because of over-compliance, which tends to be the case with most sanctions. So in that case, it's very hard, to support the sanction regime. And with regards to COVID, which I think is a very important question, I mean, what is happening in a very repressive country when a pandemic, comes? I think, the COVID is, this is not only in the case of Venezuela, but I think COVID is sadly a very useful excuse for repressive governments to be even more repressive. So in the name of COVID, they have, Venezuelan authorities have repressed and protest for food, etc. So I think it's just a very good excuse to repress even more.
And very quickly, I just wanted to ask you one last question, if you wouldn't mind. What has been the impact on indigenous populations in Venezuela? In terms of refugee, what is that? I know it's not a very good question to have a short time.
It is one of the most invisible, vulnerable groups in the country. They have been displaced internally, and they have also been displaced, forcibly displaced, to Brazil and to Colombia. Their lands have been confiscated, and unfortunately, I think it's a very invisible population, but it has been very, very, very badly affected by the policies.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. McPherson, and thank you to our witnesses on behalf of all the committee members. Thank you very much for sharing all this information with us. And now, members, we are going to suspend. We will resume once the next panel is all set up with their sound checks. Again, thank you to our witnesses. Thank you.
Thank you.
for interpretation. If you are not bilingual, at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a globe, and you can turn on the English or French, whichever that you need. On that note, I'd like to welcome our second panel of witnesses to the committee. You just heard them through their sound checks. We have from the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, Rima Jamou Mses, and the representative here in Canada. And for the Center for Global Development, we have Jimmy Graham. And we're going to start with Rima Mses. I will turn the floor over to you now for 5 minutes, and then to Mr. Graham for 5 minutes before questioning. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you all for the opportunity to address you on this important subject this evening. As you may be aware, the UN's Refugee Agency has operations on the ground inside Venezuela and in neighboring countries in the region. Our colleagues have stayed and delivered humanitarian assistance throughout the pandemic, and the information I share with you this evening is coming directly from their observations on the front lines of the response. I'm certain you may have heard this from the panelists before me, but it bears repeating that more than 5 million Venezuelans have been displaced over the last several years, of whom over 4 million have remained in the region, with Colombia hosting close to 2 million. In terms of scale, we're talking about proportions, which makes, in terms of scale, we're talking about Syria proportions, which makes this one of the biggest displacement crises we are dealing with globally. For several months running, the Americas region was the epicenter of the pandemic, and we currently have 17 million confirmed cases and over 500,000 deaths recorded. The main message I want to leave with you this evening is that COVID-19 has exposed refugees and migrants from Venezuela to even greater hardship and a heightened risk of destitution, homelessness, exploitation, and abuse. One of the most dramatic impacts has been the loss of livelihoods for hundreds of thousands of displaced persons virtually overnight. A recent World Bank study found that before the pandemic, more than 70% of the 4 million Venezuelans in neighboring countries were employed in the informal sector of the economy. With border closures and lockdowns, this meant livelihoods and the means to independently sustain one's family vanished, triggering several knock-on effects, including loss of all income, food insecurity, and evictions. The result is that the vast majority of Venezuelans are now in need of urgent assistance to meet all their basic needs, including shelter, food, and health care. Amid growing political discontent and the deteriorating socioeconomic situation in some countries in the region, many refugees and migrants are being scapegoated, increasing the risk of stigmatization. Those living without regular status or documentation also face the challenge of limited or no access to social protections or safety nets. And with schools and universities closed across the region, children and youth are losing out on an education due to limited access to online schooling and other forms of learning available to nationals. Rising poverty and homelessness are also forcing desperate refugees and migrants to return to Venezuela, often in conditions which are unsafe. Tight border restrictions to curb the spread of the virus have forced many Venezuelans to resort to irregular means of crossing borders in search of safety, thereby increasing the risk of sexual exploitation and abuse, especially for women and girls. Loss of income, xenophobia, homelessness, isolation from support networks, and heightened exposure to violent partners have all resulted in a dramatic rise of sexual and gender-based violence. And the very same conditions driving increased violence against women are also having a deeply disturbing impact on children. Increased irregular movements have increased as well the risk of abuse, neglect, recruitment by armed groups, and labor and sex trafficking of children. Neighboring countries have been generous and welcoming, and efforts have been made by governments throughout the region to provide protection, rights, and documentation to those who have left Venezuela. But as the economic impact of the pandemic begins to be felt across the region, national capacities are being stretched to a breaking point. Host countries need solidarity and support. This can take the form of increased humanitarian assistance, inclusion of refugees and migrants in development aid packages, and the expansion of resettlement opportunities for refugees. And here, Canada's generous contributions must be acknowledged and appreciated. Similar to our message to all states in the world, we're asking governments in the region to ensure that refugees and asylum seekers and migrants are included in national social protection schemes, including health and education systems, to ensure that no one is left behind. While the pandemic has exacerbated the plight of refugees and migrants from Venezuela, there are ways to mitigate the impact, and we count on the continued support of Canada and the international community to continue meeting the needs of all those who are disproportionately suffering its effects. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jamu-Estes. Now we'll move to Mr. Graham for 5 minutes.
Great, thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to participate in this panel. Over the past year, my colleagues and I at the Center for Global Development and Refugees International have conducted a series of studies examining the economic effect of COVID-19 on refugees in various countries around the world. Two of our reports look specifically at the economic effect of the pandemic on Venezuelan refugees in Colombia and Peru. And what we found in our research is that Venezuelans in these countries have been disproportionately affected by the economic effects of the pandemic. Specifically, we found that prior to the outbreak, Venezuelans were far more likely to be working in sectors that have been most affected by economic lockdown.
Point d'ordre, Monsieur le Président. Je suis franchement désolé. Malheureusement, l'interprétation n'est pas possible pour l'instant.
Okay, yeah, I do think we're having some issues with Mr. Graham's sound. If we can just try, I thought we went through the sound check and it was okay, but if we could try again, just quickly.
Okay, maybe I'll try using my computer audio.
That's much better, I think. Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, so should I start from the top or just keep going forward?
Je pense que depuis le début, ce serait intéressant.
Yeah, if you start from the start, that would be better.
Okay,
Mr. Brunel Duceppe would like it from the start. Go ahead.
Je suis désolé, je suis le seul francophone sur le panel.
Sorry, I'm the only francophone.
Colleagues and I. Okay, over the past year, my colleagues and I at the Center for Global Development and Refugees International have conducted a series of studies examining the economic effect of COVID-19 on refugees in various countries around the world. And two of our reports look specifically at the economic effect of the pandemic on Venezuelan refugees in Colombia and Peru. And what we found in our research was that Venezuelans in these countries have been disproportionately impacted by the economic effects of the pandemic. Specifically, we found that prior to the outbreak, Venezuelans were far more likely to be working in the sectors that have been most affected by the lockdowns, such as food services and retail trade. So it's likely that they are losing their jobs and sources of income at especially high rates. Compounding these challenges, we know that refugees were already earning much less on average prior to the pandemic. So for example, prior to the outbreak in Colombia, Colombian citizens were earning about 43% more than Venezuelan refugees on average, despite the fact that many Venezuelans are highly educated. And Venezuelans were 17 percentage points more likely to be working in sectors that were highly impacted by the pandemic. So the income gaps have likely grown even larger. We also found that Venezuelan women were typically more negatively affected by the economic effects of the pandemic than Venezuelan men, and that they had even lower average incomes to begin with. So as a result of being pushed even further into economic precarity, Venezuelan refugees are experiencing a wide range of devastating outcomes. So for example, in Colombia, food insecurity is widespread, with only about a quarter of Venezuelans consuming three meals a day, down from 70% prior to the pandemic. Many families have been evicted from their homes and have been left homeless, and domestic abuse, which is often driven by economic distress, is on the rise. So two important questions that emerge from these findings are, why are refugees earning so much less? And why are they working in sectors that have been most affected by the pandemic? And we think that the answer is related to the many restrictions that refugees face in the labor market. For example, in every country hosting Venezuelans in Latin America, many Venezuelans lack the legal right to work, and it's very difficult for highly educated refugees to verify their degrees and credentials. So as a result, most are forced to work in the informal sector, where wages are lower and the impacts of the outbreak have been the most severe. Another question is what can be done to support Venezuelan refugees. And so first, I think it's important to advocate for fewer labor market restrictions and barriers for refugees. This will allow them not only to recover more quickly from the economic shock created by the pandemic, but also contribute more fully to their host country's recovery from recession. It will also allow them to support the fight against the pandemic. Many Venezuelans have backgrounds as medical professionals, but in most cases, labor market restrictions prevent them from working in the medical profession. Second, I think it's important for host governments to include refugees in national recovery measures and stimulus packages, such as cash transfers to vulnerable families and subsidies to small businesses, as well as in national healthcare systems. And where necessary, I think it's important for foreign donors to provide financial support to help the low and middle income countries that are hosting Venezuelans to cover the cost of including refugees in these measures. And finally, I believe it's crucial that donors scale up efforts to support refugees, both through humanitarian support, since many refugees are in extremely precarious economic positions, and through livelihood support to help refugees reintegrate into labor markets and become self-reliant. In 2020, the Refugee and Migrant Response Plan, which is the regional humanitarian development response to Venezuelan displacement, was only 55% funded. So moving forward, there's a lot more that donors can do to make sure resources are available to meet need. So in summary, prior to the pandemic, Venezuelan refugees were already much worse off in economic terms relative to host populations. And the pandemic has only exacerbated these gaps, leaving Venezuelans in extremely precarious economic situations. And to address this problem, I think we need more advocacy for a more inclusive labor market for refugees and an increase in humanitarian and development assistance. So thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions, of course.
Okay, well, thank you to our witnesses. Mr. Graham, just with your sound, it was much better than the first, but there may be, but with the interpreters did have your remarks, written remarks. So during question and answer, just to make sure your cadence is good the way it's been, but you know, not to be too quick, and so that we could see if we could pick up all the interpretation. Okay, and on that, we're going to move to the questioners. We'll start with the Liberals with Mr. Sims for 7 minutes. Mr. Sims.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Graham, I'm going to start with you. I actually, this question for both of you. I'm deeply concerned about how the situation is worsening for those displaced outside of Venezuela in the situations they find themselves in, and as in the context of obviously COVID-19, they're doing positions or in positions where nobody else wants to be to find work. And I'm worried that this becomes far more systemic over time because they continue in this precarious position, such as in the case of medical professionals in positions of high risk. And that's notwithstanding, which is probably even more important than domestic abuse or sexual exploitation involved in here. So for people who are living outside of Venezuela, what can we do here to help these people to find themselves in a position of safety? Secondly, to find themselves in a position to better themselves upon their return, or maybe they don't want to return. So I'll start with Mr. Graham.
Yeah, great question. I think a few things. So one, I think in the short term, humanitarian support is absolutely crucial. You know, moving forward in the long term, I think lowering those labor market restrictions is the best thing. But right now, I think with people in such dire circumstances, that just making sure there's plenty of humanitarian support to make sure that they meet their basic needs in the short term, that's number one. But then I think kind of looking towards, you know, a more sustainable response, I think that this sort of advocacy for more inclusive policies is really crucial. And I know that there's a lot that donors can do, bilateral donors and multilateral donors like the World Bank, to tie funding to sort of policy conditionality and trying to work with governments to open up these labor markets, to lower restrictions, to do things to make it so that these refugees can apply their skills in the labor market, which, you know, benefits the host country, host economy, but also allows them to provide for themselves more moving forward and recover from these really devastating effects from the pandemic. So I think it's those two things of humanitarian support now, livelihood support moving forward, and then sort of advocacy with governments to make more open policies for refugees to really work.
Sorry.
Sorry, did you want me to carry on
Yes,
and
please.
answer?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I wholeheartedly agree with the comments of Mr. Graham, and I would just add a few more to supplement. Humanitarian support is absolutely essential at the moment because you are seeing a humanitarian emergency or a crisis that predated COVID, now layered with COVID on top. So the impact of that has been devastating, to say the least. And what we have seen is that host countries, which have opened, their doors and their borders to Venezuelans who were leaving Venezuela, have really borne the brunt of supporting them. So at the moment, our big call is to governments around the world, not just to governments in Latin America, but around the world, to address the impact of COVID-19 on refugees and asylum seekers by including them in national schemes, much like Mr. Graham referenced. In order to do that, these host countries require support and solidarity. So that's one of the advocacy calls that we make consistently is to support these host communities and host countries at large. It's a little known fact that 80% of the world's refugees actually remain in neighboring countries close to home. And the reason for that is because ultimately the goal is to return home. So what you often find is that large proportions are remaining in neighboring countries, and in many cases, these countries have pre-existing economic and development issues. So in order to support them in absorbing these displaced people, we routinely call on governments around the world to show solidarity through providing assistance to the host countries. So I think humanitarian assistance, absolutely, and development assistance, perhaps deepening relationships with international financial institutions and advocating on behalf of some of these countries is also one of the important things that can be done by a country like Canada.
Can I just pick up on that for one moment? You mentioned about 80% of these people remain displaced outside of the nation for a period of time in hopes of returning home. I just noticed your resume. You've been involved in these types of issues since the early 2000s. So I'm asking from your experience about this, what are the best things that countries like Canada can do to help those who are displaced, who want to return home? How do we do it? Through a bilateral agreement with the nation that's hosting them right now, or do we do it through NGOs? In your experience, what has been the most successful and the most immediate for aid?
Well, you may have seen from my CV that I actually spent most of my career in the Middle East and North Africa, and I'm not sure I can point to any successes in that region. Of course, many small successes in terms of seeing returns to countries of origin. But I think the important factor that you need to address there is looking at the root causes of displacement. What was it that triggered the movement of people in the first place? Those are going to be a range of issues, from political to economic to longer term development issues. So those need to be addressed, whether that's done bilaterally or it's done through multilaterally through the United Nations, humanitarian and development partners locally, very important as well to support. But then there's also going to be the political side of that, which Canada has to use its influence and its standing as a global leader on these issues to try and ensure that countries live up to their obligations and create the conditions that allow people to return home.
Thank you both.
And thank you, Mr. Sims, and the witnesses. We'll be moving now to the Conservatives, Mr. Reid, for 7 minutes.
Thank you. I wonder if we could stay with the same witness. From the perspective of, say, the government of Colombia or other South American governments, but let's start with Colombia. Their perspective, I assume, would be that the Venezuelans in their country are A, they're illegal migrants, and B, they're economic migrants, not refugees. Would that be essentially correct?
I don't think it's that simple. And what leads me to say that is the fact that we have about 2.4 million Venezuelans who've been regularized, if I can use that term, in Colombia, but also in neighboring countries. So those people have been afforded status and have been recognized in the country. And across the region, we have hundreds of thousands of asylum claims that have been properly legally filed by Venezuelans. So it's the situation is in the region of Venezuelans is what we would as practitioners we would call mixed flows. So there are migrants among them, there are asylum seekers among them, and there are refugees among them.
Right.
And the Colombian government has provided status to some of those people and has recognized some as refugees. So it's a bit more nuanced than that.
Once you get your status, are you able to just enter the workforce in theory, assuming there's jobs available, and become part of the regular as opposed to the irregular economy, or as opposed to the informal economy?
I think Mr. Graham might be able to answer the specifics on the economic regulations that govern the status of migrants or refugees in Colombia or perhaps in the sub-region.
Yeah, I can speak to that. I think it depends on the country, of course, but in Colombia, for one, once they have their status, and I think about close to half of all Venezuelans in the country have it, technically they're able to enter the formal labor market, but then there are problems with employers not recognizing the permits because they're permits specific to Venezuelans. There's problems of discrimination and other factors that even when they have the legal right, there are still difficulties in getting into the labor market. And especially for highly educated refugees. They might have the right to work, but they don't have their degree validated. And so it really does them little good until they can do that. And there are a lot of barriers and fees associated with trying to get those credentials recognized.
Right. A lot of these countries, I may be basing this on an out-of-date stereotype, but the impression I have is that many of these countries, the systems of credentials don't work that well. There's a fair degree of corruption, bribery as a part of getting a business to function. Is that is that a legitimate summary as opposed to being a stereotype? And B, would that weigh particularly heavily on Venezuelans who have had to go to the other countries?
Sure. I'm not sure I can speak to corruption, whether there is or not, but I know it is a really difficult process, not just for Venezuelans, but other migrants. And it's been an issue that has come up a lot in the past for economic migrants as well. So I think there are a lot of barriers that stand in the way. And there's actually a sort of one positive example recently has been in Peru before the constitutional crisis that's going on. There was an initiative from the government to allow Venezuelans with medical backgrounds to work during the pandemic as doctors to enter the medical system to support the medical system, and that'll be in place moving forward. So clearly there are things that governments can do to expedite this process. But then on the flip side, in Colombia, the government tried to do the exact same thing, but met a lot of political backlash from the medical community. And so you can kind of see there's a lot of political pushback, not just from the government, but from sort of powerful interests. So there's definitely some serious barriers that are in the way, and perhaps corruption also has something to do with it.
Sure.
Can't speak to that.
Yeah, well, fair enough. Basic statistical question. We talk of 5 million Venezuelans outside of their country. Is it the case that of those, then you meant the number 2.5 has come up, 2.5 million, that half of those effectively are now credentialed in some form, or they're leaving 2.5 million more or less who are not? Or have I got my numbers wrong? Is it the case that the 2.5 ought to be understood as being outside of that 5 million?
I think that I wouldn't say that they're credentialed in terms of having their qualifications recognized, but I think maybe in terms of having been regularized in terms
That's
of
what I should have said.
Okay,
Right.
gotcha. Yeah, I think that's about right. I'd want to check the numbers, but I think that sounds about right.
Okay,
The figure sits at about 2.5 million in the region.
Right. Is that Is that more or less spread evenly, or most of the people who have been regularized in Colombia, or?
Colombia has the sorry. No, go ahead. Colombia has the largest proportion of asylum seekers, refugees, and migrants present within its borders. But the level of regularization differs from country to country. So I would say the bulk are present in Colombia, but you also have large numbers in other countries in the region as well.
Okay, thank you. And the last question I have is just the goal of trying to get assistance into these countries in order to have it be directed towards Venezuelan migrants. It strikes me that to some degree, the local authorities might be resistant to that. They have their own needs, particularly at a time like this. How does one go about making sure that the money, the resources get directed to Venezuelan migrants?
Well, we are there at the request of the host countries to provide support and assistance in addressing the needs of those who, the foreign nationals that are present in their borders in whatever status they hold. But a main pillar of our response, our humanitarian response, is to ensure that we also address the needs of host communities. And we do that because host communities are also suffering in a lot of these instances and have faced largely similar consequences. So addressing those needs and providing assistance and support to host communities is an important part of what we do, and it tries to enhance and further social cohesion as well.
Thank you very much. And now we're going to move to the block. Mr. Brunel Duceppe for 7 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the witnesses that are with us this evening. It is really very important that we're discussing this evening. It must be acknowledged that the official border posts to Colombia have been closed since March 2020. But you have to understand that given the porosity of the border, people continue to cross between the two countries, going through the regular crossings or not using them. Those points are not really being monitored by the official border officials. But this is my question. I want to enter into this area. Maybe they're entering into the territory of paramilitary organizations. I don't know if you can answer, dear witnesses, what role paramilitary organizations play in Colombia currently with regard to displaced Venezuelans either entering the country or, for me, it's a highly important question. Both witnesses, please. Mr. Graham.
And movement constraints have been imposed. People have found ways around that by going to irregular border crossing points. And as you rightly point out, along the way, they will encounter armed groups, paramilitary groups, and quite frankly, unscrupulous human traffickers and smugglers who profit from their misery and their desperation. And so people on their journeys, seeking protection and safety elsewhere will often find themselves the victims of abuse, exploitation. I mentioned at the outset that women and girls in particular have been subject to that. But we know children as well have also been victims to human traffickers and smugglers and have themselves been bought and sold and used, in the underground labor market and for other much more unspeakable breaches and things that none of us would ever want to see children subjected to. So absolutely, this is something that they encounter. Perhaps Mr. Graham would like to add to that.
Yeah, I would completely agree.
Just before Mr. Graham answers, what we're saying is that possibly women and girls are the greatest victims of the paramilitary organizations right now in those areas. Quickly, Ms. Imseis.
That women and women and girls are victims indeed, and they have been subject to exploitation and abuse, and including human smuggling and trafficking.
Okay.
But it should be noted that that's not limited to women and girls. It includes others as well. And
I understand.
children have also been recruited into arms groups through these same practices.
Parfait. Merci. Pardon, Monsieur Graham.
Thank you. My apologies, Mr. Graham. I just wanted to confirm that point. Go ahead.
Sure, I would completely agree, and I would just add that in addition to creating these more difficult conditions for the migrants themselves, it has seemed to have had the effect of fueling sort of the violence and the standing of the paramilitary groups, because they've been able to recruit vulnerable young Venezuelans into the group. So it has sort of this double effect of being a detriment to the country as well. And I think this is something that we've seen not just in Latin America, but around the world, that when countries close borders to desperate populations, usually they don't stop coming. They just come through more harmful means, ways that are harmful to both the migrants and the host country as well.
And now we're talking about the paramilitary groups. What about the drug traffickers? Are they involved as well in the same type of process?
I think I can't speak too much to the details of this. I've heard reports from other organizations working on these issues, basically saying that I believe the drug traffickers as well and the paramilitary groups are sort of co-opting these vulnerable people that are coming in, but perhaps Ms. Imseis has more details on that.
I'm afraid I don't know the nature of their business model. If it's paramilitary groups, it's drug traffickers. Everywhere in the world where this is an issue, I can tell you, from my experience in other parts of the world, we generally see weapons, drugs, and crime are the common threads, and the extortion and abuse that they exact on people is to finance these types of business interests, if you like.
Absolutely. I'm fairly familiar with Colombia. I did a documentary on it, and I'll send you the link. I'll send you the link for it sometime soon, but I don't have much time. What are the most urgent problems right now in the area of human rights for displaced Venezuelans? And how did the pandemic contribute to that problem?
The pandemic has, as I said, exacerbated an existing humanitarian crisis. We already had a crisis before the pandemic, and now it has been made worse by it. So basic access to essential necessities of life, healthcare, education, water, shelter, sanitation, food. The entire spectrum of basic humanitarian response was all part of our humanitarian operations in that region prior to COVID, and it's now only been exacerbated by it. One of the ways in which we're addressing that now is to speak to the issue of the economic impact is by increasing our use of cash-based assistance to people, because we have, as we have both said, seen their livelihoods completely wiped out overnight because of COVID.
Thank you, Mr. Brunel de Sub. Thanks, witnesses. And now we're moving to Ms. McPherson from the NDP for 7 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank both our witnesses for joining us this evening. We've heard so much this evening about what the impacts have been and how there was a crisis for refugees coming from Venezuela prior to COVID-19, and of course, COVID-19 has made everything so much harder and so much more challenging. So what I'm a little bit interested in learning about is what Canada can do, what our role as parliamentarians, what we can actually do at this point. We heard in the last panel that there was a request for 762 million, and that in fact only 141 million of that humanitarian aid was given. So there was this $621 million gap in funding that was made available. What I've heard, I think, is that the things that you are looking for from Canada are that you would like to see an increase in support for humanitarian aid. You'd like to see Canada do more advocacy work to make sure that we are supporting the refugees, and perhaps even some work around the ability for refugees to come to Canada. But I would really like you to take a few moments to just both of you to tell us what Canada very, very clearly could do to help the Venezuelan refugees right now, in quite good detail, if you wouldn't mind. And maybe I would start with you, Ms. Mosa.
Thank you. I have a very detailed answer, in fact, to give you on this one, because
Yes.
it's my talking points whenever I meet with the government. In fact, I have to say that I wouldn't be a good humanitarian if I didn't say that funding our humanitarian response plans would be the first order of business. Canada has been a generous supporter and contributed to our organization and to our emergency appeals globally, and continues to be one. But of course, any additional support would be welcome and would be put to very good use. So that is the first bit, additional humanitarian support. The second part would be to use Canada's influence and standing in international financial institutions to support additional financing, development financing, and development aid packages to the countries in the region. That's something that Canada's already been doing, and we would welcome stepping up that effort in order to ensure that these countries are bolstered and provided with support so that they can do the kinds of things they need to, including the very solutions we're asking for, like ensuring people are included in social protection schemes. Canada has agreed to host the next international pledging conference for Venezuela. That should be taking place in the first part of next year. I think in the second quarter, the date has yet to be determined. But we are working with Canada and with the International Organization of Migration to ensure that that's a successful event. The last one raised quite a bit of money, both in terms of humanitarian aid, but also loans and grants to countries in the region, and we'd like to see the same outcome, if possible, at this next pledging conference. So that's a huge support. And if you ask me, the last thing I would say before turning over to Mr. Graham, I think Canada's resettlement program has been tremendously generous. Canada now stands as the largest resettlement country in the world for 2 years running. But any more we can do to increase the spaces available, particularly to skilled Venezuelans, many of whom have English and experience which is relevant and can address some of the persistent labor market shortages here in Canada. Canada has already announced its intention to bring people here on a special innovative labor mobility scheme. But if we can help that succeed and grow, we'll have gone a long way towards supporting these people.
Thank you so much. Mr. Graham?
So I completely agree with all those points about funding and resettlement, so I won't rehash that, but I'll add by speaking a little bit about advocacy. So I think there is a need to potentially create funding mechanisms that can be a sort of a vehicle for advocacy and policy change. And I'll give an example of what I mean from cases from other countries. So in 2016, the Jordan Compact was created, which was basically an agreement between various donors, including the World Bank and some other bilateral donors, to essentially tie funding to support the refugee response in Jordan and provide other types of support to the government in exchange for basically opening up the labor market to refugees, allowing refugees more rights to work and participate in the economy. And that was not perfect, but it had a lot of success in moving those policies forward and supporting Jordan at the same time and hosting refugees. And more recently, something similar has been done in Ethiopia to similar effect. So there's scope for sort of donors working together to move the policy agenda forward. And I know this isn't an immediate fix to the problem of COVID, but I think it's clear that the refugee crisis in Latin America is going to continue for who knows how long. So I think it's important to think not just about, what can we do now with this humanitarian support, which is of course crucial, but start thinking about what can be done to create an environment that allows refugees to, work towards self-reliance and also contribute to the host country economies. So I think kind of bringing it back together, kind of beginning to advocate for those kind of funding mechanisms for Canadian foreign aid to push for these kind of things to create these vehicles for policy changes. I think it would be a powerful way to move forward the advocacy agenda.
Okay, and I know Mr. Fonseca is going to get mad at me in a moment, but I really, really quickly will just ask, in terms of when you talk about Canada using its role, its advocacy, its ability to influence for things like financing, are you looking more in terms of the bilateral or the multilateral financing mechanisms? Which of those would be most appropriate in this case, I suppose?
Yeah, Ms. McPherson. So the witnesses may be able to do that in your second round. So we're going to move to the second round. I'm just looking at the time and to be mindful. So we're going to have about 3.5 minutes to 4 minutes for the witnesses. We're going to move over now to the Liberals for 3.5 to 4 minutes. Mr. Zuberi is going to start.
I want to thank both of you for being here and for taking the time to inform us on this very important issue. I wanted to also highlight what Ms. Jamous Imsis mentioned, which was that the impacts or the displacement is on the level of Syria, what we saw recently in Syria, and I think that's a really important marker for us because it's an important reference point. I was curious around the impact of sanctions on the situation in Venezuela and how that also spills over into the displacement of Venezuelans. If you want to touch upon that, either of you, please. And we have about 3 minutes less.
Graham, if you'd like to kick that off, Mr. Graham.
Sure. So unfortunately, this is not an area where I have a lot of expertise. We've really focused our research on the impacts within the hosting country. So it's a great question, but I unfortunately do not have a lot to offer on that topic.
Thanks.
Similarly, I'm not an expert on sanctions, but I can tell you that the situation in the country is dire, and it's largely precipitated by initially, in addition to political factors, serious economic contraction and episodes of hyperinflation, shortages of basic commodities, access to services that one would expect of a functioning government. All of those things are going to be impacted by sanctions whenever you apply them to a country, and we've seen the impact of those kinds of sanctions in other places in the world. But it's not for me to determine whether that's an effective tool or not, but just to say that perhaps it certainly isn't going to make the economic situation any better.
Thank you. And picking up on the idea of displacement, what types of people are actually leaving Venezuela? If you can just shed some light onto that.
So I'll just say quickly, I haven't seen the latest information, but I know just looking from the data that's been collected, it seems like it's all kinds of people. We have, a really broad spread of demographics. But one thing I would add, just sort of the benefit of host countries, there's been a lot of highly educated populations leaving the country, which is why the credentialing issue is such a important one. But aside from that, we've seen, I think, really widespread, but maybe you'd like to add more.
I think it's true that the profile varies, and usually it's those who have access to an exit that are the first ones who can take it, and those people generally have access to more resources. But as time has carried on, this is impacting every socioeconomic strata, every profile, every kind of person you can imagine. And we're talking about over 5 million people, so it's a significant part of the population.
Thanks.
So, Mr. Zuberi, I think your time is pretty much up. We're going to move over to the Conservatives and Mr. Van Popta for about 3.5 to 4 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, witnesses, for spending time with us. Ms. Jamous, of the UNHCR and Mr. Graham of the Center for Global Development. So Ms. Hamous, am I saying that correctly?
Close, but I think Mr. Zuberi wins the award for best pronunciation. You can call me Rima if it makes it easier.
I'll go with Rima. That's fine. So thank you for that. You stated you downplayed very modestly your successes in your previous role, working in the Middle East and North Africa. I think you had said, and I understand that it's such a daunting task. Listening to the evidence from these witnesses and the earlier panel as well. So how do you measure success in the work that you do? And I ask it in light of the comment that you had said in your testimony, thanking Canada for its contribution. So perhaps you could expand on that a bit, and how do you measure success?
As a humanitarian, success means I'm out of a job. It means my operation has been folded up and we've left the country because those emergency support services are no longer required. So I wish I could say that were the case, but what we're finding around the world is a proliferation of conflict, and situations of displacement are protracted. Once upon a time, you would have a crisis and people would be back in their borders within a year, perhaps two. Now the average length of displacement is between 17 and 20 years. So the world is seeing increased insecurity. I fear that climate change and the impact of that will also drive further displacement. And it seems that we're up against quite a number of things, and that the generation after me will still have some work to do on this. So success would mean you don't need us anymore.
Right. You must measure small successes along the way.
Well, that's why I said small.
Right. Okay, good. Well, thank you for that. Mr. Graham, a question for you. You told us about the important study that you and your colleagues have undertaken. I found that very interesting, but it would help me to understand better the significance of those studies if I were to have a better understanding of the perspective of how many people are involved in this. I understand 5.5 million refugees out of a total population of something under 30 million from Venezuela, mostly in Colombia, but also some in Peru, some in Brazil. So perhaps give us a sense of proportion.
Sure. So our study looked at, it was essentially using the labor market data from each of the countries. So it was comprehensive in scope. We were able to, representative data. So we were able to look at essentially the entire refugee population in both Colombia and Peru, which was, some 2 million in Colombia and close to 1 million in Peru, I think, and saw that, like I said, 50% income gap before the crisis, which is huge, and then much more impact on those refugee populations as a result of the crisis. So, I mean, this is sort of national in scope, seeing these really big gaps in income and big effects. So I think it speaks to the sort of widespread nature of the impact of COVID on refugees in these countries.
Good. Well, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Popta. And now we'll move over to Mr. Brunel Duceppe for about 3.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had some issue with my microphone. I really would like to thank the witnesses. According to a last report of Human Rights Watch, there are more than 5 million of Venezuelans who went to other countries and brought sickness that were already eradicated in those countries. And I have those countries had already difficulties to deal with the health, but for instance, could you give me an answer? Like, yeah.
as I said earlier, typically around the world, the majority of refugees end up being hosted in neighboring countries. And because of the regions in which these crises are situated, many of those neighboring countries have themselves deep structural, economic, and social challenges that they're reckoning with, including health systems, which lack capacity. In the region that we're talking about this evening, one of the things we've had to do is try to support local health authorities in order to address the impact of COVID. We've done that in a number of ways by, in some cases, building facilities and providing units in which to do quarantines and to isolate people and to also treat people. Another way we've done that is by providing capacity support and development to local health authorities. And we've also provided equipment and essentials for medical responses. And so if we find ourselves in a country like Canada at moments during this, the peaks of this pandemic, having to seek out assistance and support and scramble to get the basics that are required, you can only imagine what the situation would be like in countries with systemic problems.
In addition to the sickness that were eradicated, that were added, that came with the migrants. This is not what happened. It didn't happen in Canada.
I'm not sure that it would be fair to say that the migrants or the refugees or asylum seekers were themselves vessels who brought illness with them to these countries, but certainly weak infrastructure and problems with water and sanitation and health facilities that lack capacity are only going to provide further challenges for the authorities.
I agree with you. There may be, well, it can exacerbate a feeling of xenophobia, saying that they are bringing different sicknesses, and people understand that it's dangerous for them.
Now we're going to be moving to Ms. McPherson for last questioner, and you'll have about 3.5 minutes, Ms. McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think I'll follow up on some of the questions that got a little bit cut off previously. In terms of prioritizing the humanitarian aid, in terms of how we should be rolling this out, the first question I have for both of you, could you talk a little bit about whether or not it would be most valuable to have that humanitarian aid go to Venezuela so that the refugees could return to their communities, to their country, or would it be more valuable for us to be giving that aid to the hosting countries of these refugees? And if you could talk a little bit about the mechanism, whether that would be through a multilateral, a bilateral channel, whether we'd be using CSOs, whether we would be using local organizations. And I'll just pass it back to you and ask for your comments on that.
So I can start, and I'd say there's, I think, a role for both multilateral and bilateral aid. When it comes to the multilateral side, I think that has had the sort of best track record with doing the kind of work that I was talking about in terms of creating compacts that move forward the policy agenda, specifically through the World Bank. And I think that's a good vehicle for kind of supporting governments directly in addressing things like ailing health systems. And by supporting governments directly, I think that's the best way to sort of push forward on the policy agenda. But I think there's also a scope for bilateral aid agencies to do that as well. So for example, in the Ethiopia Compact, it was a combination of the World Bank and what used to be DFID from the UK in doing that. But then, so I don't hog the time, I'll pass it over to let Ms. Jamu move forward with the rest.
I'm so sorry that my name pronunciation has not been fantastic, but Rima, if you wouldn't mind.
Not to worry. I just to answer the first part of your question, whether the support should go first to Venezuela or to the neighboring countries, I'd say both in equal measure, because you have dire needs, whether inside the country or outside of the country. So either of those two would be a fantastic place to provide support and additional resources.
Okay. And would you, if you had to say whether or not the multilateral or the bilateral was the best mechanism for which to provide that aid, do you have any comments on that?
I would say at the moment, we're very fortunate because we've learned from previous emergencies that the best way to respond is to do so comprehensively and in partnership between the UN and local organizations. And we have for Venezuela, as Mr. Graham mentioned earlier, a combined appeal which contains all of the requirements that are needed for the emergency response. And that's for NGO partners as well as UN actors. So that's the regional migrant refugee response plan, and that would be a place where you could find the various elements required and the associated resources that would be needed to deliver those.
Wonderful,
thank you. And that's your time, Ms. McPherson. And on that, I just want to, on behalf of all the committee members and the clerk and the interpreters and everybody else that has been joining us here this evening, we want to thank you for your testimony, for the answers that you provided to the many questions. We really appreciate it. So thank you so much. And just now, and this will conclude this session, just to the members, I just want to remind everybody, deadlines for nominees for the Women Human Rights Defenders Recognition is tomorrow, December 4th. So as we agreed upon, and that should be it for the evening. I'm going to ask for consent to adjourn, and so that we can all get to our families. Yep, great. Thank you, everybody. Have a good evening.